Thanks for joining us on a CX Moment. This weekly series is where we chat with companies about what's happening with their business, their support centers, and with their customer experience. If you want to catch up on any of our previous episodes, check out Zendesk's YouTube channel, and you can find our conversations with companies like Slack, Freshly, Box, and Upwork. I'm Sarah Reed from Zendesk, and today we're joined by Nina Levin from Lyra Health. If you've joined us before, you know this 30 minutes goes by really fast. So ask your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, and we'll do our best to answer them all. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, Nina, thanks for joining us today.
Hello, how are you doing? Good morning.
I'm good. So today we're going to talk a little less about operations, and we're going to dive into something which I think we can all agree is equally as important, and that is the self-care for ourselves, our customers, and for our employees. And, I'm sure you feel this way, but we talk a lot about the logistics these days, about moving from offices into remote environments, but we're not talking as often about what that emotional impact is. And that's where you guys come in, right?
That's right. Yeah. So I work at Lyra Health. We are a mental health technology company that helps big organizations, big and small organizations, help their employees get access to top mental health care and mental health care services. So that's what we're here for.
And what have you been noticing or hearing anything different than you did, let's say, 2-3 months ago?
I mean, I think, we all know this crisis has been really difficult emotionally for everyone. And that, goes for leadership and managers and also, front lines, customer service employees too. And I would definitely say, there's been a shift for sure. And I think there's a couple of ways of looking at it. There's sort of like the emotional impact on the self or the individual, and then there's the impact on your broader organization. So on the sort of like the individual side, what we've definitely seen both internally at Lyra, our employees, as well as kind of our partner employees at companies that we work with, is there's kind of this feeling of like amplified emotional impact. So people's highs are really, really high, but their lows are also deeply, deeply low. And I think, if you're at an organization where you have the Lyra benefit, you can easily, very quickly access mental health care and find a professional who can help you through that. Otherwise, it's just hard for sort of the general public to find a therapist or someone to talk to or even know what you need, because I think that's not something we learn. We don't take a class on what kind of therapist you're looking for.
What's my mental health requirements right now? That's definitely not something that I've, ever learned in an onboarding course with any job. And Allie from Slack and I were talking about this a couple of weeks ago, that many of us are going through something that we can't really even explain, in that some days we feel great, like this is no big deal, I could do this forever. And then some days you wake up and you're like, I just hate Zoom. I hate talking to all of my employees through this little screen. I don't want to do this today. Why is that happening to us?
I think, so to me, the biggest tragedy of this crisis really is that, in previous times of crisis, we find comfort in being with our loved ones. We find comfort in being in the presence of somebody who's listening to us, who's actively present, whose, internet isn't glitching out. They're there for you. And the deep sort of tragedy and complication of this crisis is that's the one thing you can't do, is go and be with your loved ones, go and be with your family, find comfort in that sort of shared bonded humanity and experience. And so I think that's been the kind of added amplification of how difficult this crisis is. If there's any managers on the call or founders of startups, I think it's really important to think about the employees that you should be thinking about right now are really the ones that either live alone or live with a roommate, because loneliness and stress are just kind of this like tower that just keeps building and building and building over time. And I think it's really important to think about those people and their situations, because those are kind of the people that we just need to be paying attention to right now, for sure.
Would you say the loneliness factor is what you're seeing the most of with employees during this lockdown?
I would say it's one of many things. I think loneliness is a big part of it. I think from if we're kind of narrowing the lens on employees and their experience in their organization, or your listeners' in organization, I think what's really important as well is this sort of stress and even more than that, uncertainty about the future. And even if they have job security, I would wager that most managers right now are not having conversations with their employees, number one, about their mental health, but number two, even about their career goals or promotions or evaluating performance. Everything's just kind of taken a pause. So a piece of advice for managers for sure is continue to have conversations about the future with your employees. Sit down with individuals and say, hey, I know things are crazy right now, but this is really important to me that we talk about this. They need to have a sense of the future and feel like there is an end of the tunnel throughout this crisis. And even if the world has changed, even if the nature of work has changed for all of us, the nature of caring for your employees and your coworkers shouldn't change. Maybe the form has changed, but the spirit should still be there.
That's a really excellent point about not stalling those conversations about the future, because I think many of us just intrinsically have done that because we know for many companies out there, they're in hiring freezes, they're likely in promotion pauses. So a lot of those things that typically would have been happening in the spring and the summer have come to a halt while we all figure out how to keep our businesses moving ahead, right? Exactly. But that shouldn't negate the conversation with your employee about making sure that you're being as transparent as possible and that there is still a future out there. It just might be a little blurrier than what we were expecting.
Yeah, and to that end too, I think we also, again, I talk a lot about management because I think managers have this really special place in an employee's life, and both from that like an emotional support level, I think it's deeply important for every manager to invest in like a mental health first aid class, being able to kind of pick out signals and signs when somebody might be struggling. But more importantly, I think it's also important to have context in your mind that you're going to have star performers where in this environment, they might just not be able to function. And that's okay. It's okay to have that conversation. You might have people of the opposite who maybe are kind of low performers in the office, but in this environment, for whatever reason, they can focus more at home. They can, they're more Slack people than in-person chat people or chat or whatever. And those people are going to rise. It's okay to kind of see these shifts. It's just about all of this is an exercise in adaptability and sort of like fitness for adaptability.
Before we keep going, and this is probably something I should have done right off the bat, but can you give our audience just a little idea of what your background is? Because it's different than many of the other speakers that we've had on the broadcast so far.
Definitely. So my position is I'm the Director of Provider and Patient Relations at Lyra Health, which I described as a mental health technology company. Prior to this, I was the Director of Operations at a psychiatric clinic, actually. So I was working with 5 doctors who are psychiatrists. And, when you're working in mental health care, you have to approach business differently and you have to approach decisions differently because your stakeholders, your customers are people who are often very fragile or people who are sometimes non-functional, and you're working with a guardian or you're working with a parent. And so I have kind of my background is a mix of sort of mental health and clinical operations along with, sort of hardcore operations and customer service. So that's where I'm at.
That's a very fascinating background. And you mentioned that handling business is very different on this side. And I would anticipate you would not have expected that this was going to be something that you were dealing with in 2020 either. A global pandemic really doesn't come into play with any of our playbooks, does it? And with
Definitely. Yeah.
For a lot of leaders, this is their first time that they've had remote employees. And I would say, having those delicate conversations, even face-to-face when you're in the office together, can be challenging. But now trying to have some challenging, very personal conversations through Zoom, is it easier or harder? Like, what are those things that you suggest for managers who are now having new remote employees for the first time?
For sure. So on a tactical level, I think if you're ever having a conversation with your employee or an important conversation with a coworker, I think, or your manager, again, tactic, a couple of things that work really well. Close out every other screen. Do put
Mm,
your do not disturb on. The other thing that I find really helpful is actually hiding myself on Zoom, because that is one big difference, like hiding your video screen on Zoom, because I think that's a mentally exhausting thing, is looking at yourself while you're trying to have a conversation with someone else. So I always turn my own reflective video off. In Zoom, you can do that just by right clicking and selecting hide me. And I think that helps you be more present. I think in the absence of actually physically being there and being able to get these sort of emotional cues or nonverbal cues from the person, wipe away all other distractions while you're having that
such a
conversation.
great idea.
Yeah, yeah. I would also say have frequent conversations. Like the depth of the conversation is really important. Have important conversations, but also just schedule a literal 10-minute check-in with someone just to say hi. Like you would stop by someone's desk, or
Right.
that you would, go like drop by and have lunch with them. Be actively present. And I think that that goes a really long way. And then if you do have to have a very difficult conversation or a very sort of intense conversation, you've set the stage and you've built rapport. And for me, it's like getting to know your employees and your coworkers as human beings is so, so important. I think being able to pick up when someone is struggling is only possible when you know that person in and out, their pet peeves, what makes them stressed, their home situation, what they're like outside of work. I think, we're a progressive world with, we don't live in a world where you have to be 100% professional all the time. I think getting to know them as people goes a really long way. And again, this idea of like investing in mental health first aid as a manager, being able to catch signs and being there for somebody, whether that's at your organization, even maybe through their, if they decide to move on, staying connected with that person as well.
That's such great advice. And do you think this is now an opportunity for us to get to know our employees and our coworkers a little bit better now that we're not in that rush of the office all the time and just bypassing one another? We can actually spend more quality time together.
I definitely think I believe in positive psychology. See everything as an opportunity. See everything as sort of I could see in a lot of ways. I was talking to a friend of mine who was saying, I'm a lot less annoyed by my coworkers since we're,
I might be more annoyed with my husband, but less annoyed with my coworkers.
right, exactly. It's just a shift in the annoyance. But absolutely. I mean, I think it's definitely an opportunity. It's a lot easier in this environment to kind of just send someone a Slack and be like, hey, want to hop on a call right now? Just want to check in, or I need a break. I want to chat with someone and have a laugh. Or I think it absolutely is an opportunity to get to know your coworkers and your employees better. I think it's an opportunity to have, in a lot of ways, sometimes having a heart to heart with someone in person can also be hard. Vulnerability is a very difficult thing for
Yeah.
most people. I think sometimes having the screen there kind of feels like you have this layer of protection a little bit. And so I think, yes, absolutely. I completely agree with that statement. I think definitely it's an opportunity. See everything as an opportunity.
No, not surprising, but we're getting a lot of questions in from people. And one of the questions, which I think is really important, is around that vulnerability. And this comes in from Emily, and she asks, what are ways to deal with furloughs? And I would say that this also goes along with, another question comes in from someone who's inquiring about people who are not laid off but just aren't working, like there's not enough work for them. And are we supposed to limit our thoughts and feelings, or are we supposed to ride this out emotionally with them?
So I'm a big believer. I don't think that we have a limited amount of empathy. I think that every person, I think it's a muscle you have to work on though. I think that you have to actively, I mean, again, as tactical and as terrible as it sounds, like put reminders on your calendar to check in with someone that you're worried about every 3 days. And letting someone know that you're thinking of them and that you're concerned about them, or that you just want to let them know, hey, I'm here for you. I know this is a really difficult period. And also, again, getting back to this theme of like, there is a future. This isn't the end of the world. And sort of saying like, no matter what happens, I'm here for you. I will help you job search. I'll recommend you to people that I know. No matter what happens, I'm here for you, both on a human level and sort of on a, organizational level, goes a really long way. And again, I think letting someone know that you're thinking about them is just, it's such a wonderful feeling to get that note from someone, and feel like you have the space to kind of say to them, yeah, you're right. Like, I am having a really hard time.
So when you're trying to set those things up,
Yeah.
Courtney is asking, what's your favorite quick connect question for a coworker? What's something that when you're trying to set up these very, very brief sessions with someone, what's a quick question you can ask that really breaks that ice?
I would say, I actually like telling people, hey, I was just thinking about you. And here's an article or a picture or a funny video I saw that thought of you. I just want to see your face, and just say like, hey, I just thought of you. I miss you and I want to see your face. Or if that's too personal for you, just say, I was thinking about you and I just want to check in, and give some space for you to tell me how you're doing.
I like that. And what other resources would you advise for someone who doesn't have a resource like Lyra Health? For companies that aren't investing in great services like yours, what can employees do?
I think it's a great place to start is, there are a lot of awesome coaching, life coaching, online life coaching. And again, like, I think that's a good place to start for everyone, because sometimes a therapist can be a little bit too clinical. I think there's, obviously BetterHelp is a good one. There's a bunch of, there's one called Basis that's just life coaching. I believe in those mental health apps. I actually find them really great. I love Headspace for meditation, although I know a lot of people head for the hills when they hear meditation. But, meditation can be anything. It can also be being just turning the lights off and listening to your favorite song. That's meditation for a lot of people.
Yep.
I love
Exercise.
Yeah, exactly. I love, gaming. I like virtual reality, and I find like visual stimulation to be very meditative for me. So it just depends on like what takes you out of your current existence, and still feel all the feelings. Very important. Continue to feel those, but just notice them as opposed to lean into them.
That's a really good point. And we now have all of these resources, particularly on our phone. You talked about Headspace, taking just a few moments of doing some meditation, if that's your thing. Or for me, we bought a rower. And so I'll hop on our water rower just for like 10 minutes in between calls. And it's just like, I need something to do that just wipes my brain for just a short period of time. There's a little reset that we all have to do. And that actually comes into another question from Bridget, who's saying, she's a great manager and she's trying really hard to be supportive and present, but she's also struggling with her own capacity for emotional labor. And what are some of those ideas that you might have to help her tend to her own emotional state while also being there for her team?
Absolutely. So I think it's really important to know that everyone is going to have a different thing that works for them. We all know this is kind of a trope at this point, but like, for example, what worked for me. So much like Bridget, I was really struggling at one point because I was, managing a team where like I had learned that maybe I needed to fire a couple people. This wasn't at Lyra, it was a different place that I worked. And there was just like, I had to prep these conversations. The emotional investment and energy it took to think about each person and what kind of conversation I was going to have was just really overwhelming. I personally started learning a bit about Stoicism and about kind of like managing my emotions and managing my mental energy, and approaching those conversations from a perspective of like, what is the best possible outcome that I can give this person, as opposed to like, I need to have an emotional experience every time I have these conversations. It's sort of like the focus is let's do what's best for the person I'm talking to, and how I feel about it, I'm going to do my best to put that aside, because my real focus in the end game here is to get that person where they need to be, in the most stable place possible. I think there's a few things that Bridget could do for self-care too. I think we hear this word, it gets thrown around quite a lot. And I was thinking about this the other day. A lot of people in the prior COVID world, self-care was like getting their nails done or getting their hair done. It was like, can't do that right now.
Yeah, so let's not talk about getting our hair done right now.
So I think there's some other, great things that people can employ. I think getting sleep is just so important, you guys. The best class I ever took in college was a sleep psychology class, which was totally transformative. The irony being I stayed up all night writing my paper at the end of those. Besides the point. But like really deeply understanding, and just as a quick learning, like there are so many great TED Talks about getting good sleep. Understanding sleep hygiene. So, as you mentioned, exercise, personally hate it, but I do it because I know I won't regret it. Good sleep hygiene. So no computers, no TV in bed, no phone if you can avoid it. I actually, when I'm not working, I will close the lid and put my computer under the sink in the bathroom, because then I know, like, I'm in my off hours. If I go and pick up my computer, it's so ridiculous for me to go to the bathroom and pull it out that I'm like, okay, I shouldn't be doing that. Understanding that, like, start a sleep ritual, like, doing a specific set of stretches before bed, or a very specific breathing exercise, build that sleep routine. Very, very important. And no chocolate before bed, because that actually keeps you up at night. So like 2 or 3.
No, thank you.
and keeping the temperature in your bedroom cool. These things can go a really long way.
And those are things that, while life-changing, also don't have to be this big monumental thing that I accomplished while I was, under quarantine. And Hannah has asked a similar question, and I think this is something that's so important, because we're all out on Instagram, right? And we're seeing all these people who are, becoming a master sourdough bread maker, and, have perfected their yoga, and, are learning 3 new languages. And for some of us, we're like, I don't have that capacity to do that right now. Yes. And, my self-care might actually be getting the 8 hours of sleep that I've never been able to get in the past. And that's okay, right?
Yeah. And if you become a great sleeper, tell everyone, because that's be proud too. Someone might be a great bread baker, but maybe you sleep really, really well, and you should be proud of that. I think, and on the social media front, our fabulous clinical director, clinical partnerships director, talked a lot about how social media it provides a lot of good for people in times of good things, but in times of bad things, it just further kind of pushes you into a dark place. I use something called like Facebook Feed Eradicator, which actually I can't even see my feed. It's a Chrome extension, which I highly suggest, and you can still see messages and events and stuff. But I feel that I need to be separated from social media, because I think it makes my life harder, and it makes me feel less than my best self. So I completely sympathize with that.
One of our listeners, Steve, has said that the best TED Talk on sleep is called "Sleep is Your Superpower."
Yes, that one's a great one. It's really good. Yeah.
Dave has asked something that I'm sure a lot of people are feeling, perhaps on both ends of the spectrum. And that is, as a manager, sometimes you may come across as overbearing through this environment without actually intending to be. You have all the care in the world, but you may be overstepping your bounds.
Okay.
And so what are those boundaries essentially, and how do we make sure we don't overstep them? And then as an employee or a coworker, how do I politely tell you to back off a little bit right now? I'm okay. I can figure it out. I might just be having a really bad day, but tomorrow I'm all right.
I think I'm setting expectations and just telling everyone at once, hey, I'm going to be checking in on all of you. I'm not targeting anyone. Like, I'm worried about all of you. I care about all of you. If it feels like it's too much or you don't have time for it, just send me a quick ping, or decline my calendar invite.
Don't take it personally.
Yeah, don't take it personally. This is like it. You got to do you, and you know your experience is your experience. I'm just here to help if you're open for that. Also, leverage HR. I think people kind of forget HR. This is part of their function. If you as a manager don't feel comfortable, or if you think your employee wouldn't feel comfortable going to you directly, HR is a great place to go. So definitely leverage them. You know, get to know somebody in your HR department, and ask for their assistance with this particular thing.
Thank you for that reminder. Many of us have probably forgotten that our HR teams are still working, and they would like to hear from us too. And fantastic advice. Don't take it personally. Feel free to decline a self-care check-in if you don't feel you need it. Communicate widely with your teams. Let them know that you aren't singling, someone out. Love all of that. This is also a really hot question right now, and I've seen a lot of commentary around this on LinkedIn and other places. PTO. Why is it still important for us to be taking PTO even when we have nowhere to go?
Yeah, so even prior to COVID, we were getting into this very dangerous world of like working hours and non-working hours are just kind of all melded, because you might get pinged on Saturday for something urgent, and guess what? Like you're gonna answer it. You can't not answer it. We're human beings. We respond to notifications. These things are designed specifically for our emotional response. I would suggest, or what I think is really helpful, again, kind of more on the tactical level, is make it kind of just a light, casual policy on your team, and say, hey, if you need to send an email or something on a weekend, snooze it until Monday. Like no matter what it is, always snooze until Monday. Let's care about each other. Let's do what's good for each other. And unless it's like, the place will burn down if we don't, respond to this right away, everything should be snoozed until a weekday. Take PTO. PTO is so important. I'm taking a PTO day Friday, and commit to making it a real PTO day, and give yourself like a pat on the back, a check for success for not kind of getting involved in work for that day. It is hard to do, but definitely take PTO, call your loved ones, go outside. It's beautiful here in California. And I know some friends on the East Coast are saying weather's nice there too. Do work within the bounds of this strange and crazy world that we're in, and give time for yourself. And I'd say get out of the house. We're in the house all day long. And definitely one random piece of interesting trivia is keep your windows open when you're working from home, because actually there's like the carbon monoxide levels builds up in your house if you don't keep a window open. And our alarm actually went off because we hadn't had the windows open in so long. So it's very good for the brain. So get lots of oxygen from the outdoors.
Well, I think that is such a great piece of advice for us to end on. Keep your windows open. It will make all of us feel better, and get outside where you can. I know there's actually quite a few questions that we didn't get a chance to get to. I'm going to send those to Nina after this, and we will post those so that you have an opportunity to get your questions answered. And if you did have any questions around the operational stuff that we didn't cover at all, feel free to ask those as well. But Nina, I have to say, thank you so very much for giving us your time today. So a big thanks to you and to all the people who work at Lyra Health. The work you do and the work of all of our frontline personnel is so greatly appreciated. And more than ever before, having these resources at our fingertips is so necessary. And as always, please connect with Zendesk and the rest of our community. These are the things that we love to do, and we love to talk about what's happening with you and with your companies and with your employees and customers. We love you all. Join us next week for 2 broadcasts. On Monday, May 11th, we're going to host a CX Moment Gives Back with Birchbox and Wanable. And then on Thursday, as usual, we'll be chatting with the CFOs of both Zendesk and Etsy. So 2 really great sessions. And that's all we have today. And we thank you all very much. Take care of yourselves, be healthy, be safe, and goodbye.